Hello, I'm Nate, aka B-Tier Mutineer, and as part of my B-Tier guides for Dragon Age Origins, I'm going to take you through a comprehensive guide for the Rogue class. I of course have rogue builds for your Warden and the 2 rogue companions, but in this guide I want to take you through all the stats, abilities, gear, and important elements of rogues so that you can make your own builds and generally feel more comfortable playing a rogue in Origins. As a note, I use the mod Dane's Fixes, which I've mentioned in many of my videos as a must-have since it fixes many bugs related to combat and mechanics, and various features in the game that were not properly implemented, such as some of the item stats. Because of this, I might have a slightly different opinion on certain abilities and items since Dane's Fixes changes them and possibly makes them more or less viable than in the vanilla game. I highly recommend the mod, at least the basic bug fixes and some of the tweaks, though I also like a lot of the optional tweaks and extras. Before we get into the guide proper, I want to take a moment to say a special thank you to my members who help keep this channel running. I'd really appreciate it if you'd consider joining the channel as a member to support me and unlock perks like early access to videos. Joining is very much appreciated but not required. I am always thankful even if you just take the time to like the video and maybe leave a comment. Back to the guide. Let's start with the basics of the rogue class, explaining what a rogue can do well, what types of build archetypes there are, and what stats rogues generally care about. First and foremost, it's important to understand that rogues are the least versatile class in Origins because really they're just damage dealers. You can get a few supporting abilities with the Bard and Ranger specializations, but overall rogues are meant to do a lot of damage and get rid of key targets quickly. You do have 2 build archetypes, the Scrapper, aka Melee Damager, and the Archer, so I'll go into detail about those now. The Scrapper is what the game calls a Melee Damager in the Tactics presets so that it's not confused with the Mage Damager. For rogues, this archetype is focused on dual wielding since that's the only melee weapon style that the rogue has access to. I have seen some crazy builds out there, like the one using a 2-handed weapon for backstabs instead of dual wielding, but that kind of thing is difficult to pull off and isn't the intended way to play a rogue. The rogue Scrapper has an advantage over the warrior because they have access to backstabbing enemies. However, melee rogues are more difficult to play and set up tactics for, since backstabbing requires really good positioning, which the game's AI is not very good at. So you'll often find that you have to micromanage your rogue Scrappers. I'll talk about this in more detail in the gear section, but for this archetype you want to wield dual daggers and generally stay away from the other strength-based weapons, swords, axes, and maces. Daggers have damage that scales half with strength and half with dexterity, and more importantly, the higher tier daggers only have dexterity requirements to equip. Since rogues tend to favor light armor, though medium armor can be used in some cases, like my Duncan Inspire build, you don't want to waste points into strength for those larger weapons, since dexterity and cunning will increase your damage and the effectiveness of your abilities a lot more. The Archer archetype is the ranged damage dealing one, which uses longbows or shortbows as the main weapons, and of course the archery weapon style for talents. The rogue excels at archery due to not really needing to put points into strength, and thus being able to mostly just invest in dexterity, which increases bow damage, defense, and the attack score for ranged weapons. The main focus on dex also works well with the fact that stats good for archers can mostly be found only on light armor pieces, which only need a bit of strength to equip, or not even that if you use the dexterity light armor mod like I do. Finally, if you'd like to add a bit of support or utility to your rogue, then the best way to do that is by unlocking the Bard or Ranger specializations. Bard has some nice sustain talents that give buffs to the entire party, but you can only have one of the 2 active at a time. The Ranger allows you to summon an animal companion like a wolf or a bear, which is useful as a secondary tank to soak up damage in the front line. Generally, I'd say that the Ranger specialization is best for archers, for the sole reason that Scrappers can make use of the Assassin or Duelist specialization for some extra damage and effectiveness in melee combat. Whereas the Archer can only get useful buffs from Bard sustains and Archery Talents, so their second specialization point can be used on the Ranger for utility. But even if you do decide to add these support capabilities to your rogue, keep in mind that they will still be a damage dealer baseline. This is what the rogue can generally do in terms of build archetypes: deal damage in melee or from afar, with of course a couple of support/utility options from Bard and Ranger. While not as versatile in terms of builds as the warrior and mage, rogue's damage potential is very high. And don't forget that rogues are extremely useful in exploration as well, as they can open locked doors and chests and disarm traps. You get XP for succeeding at these actions, and of course access to extra loot from lockpicking. One more unique feature of rogues is that they receive a skill point every 2 level ups. In comparison, warriors and mages only get a skill point every 3 levels. This can be useful if you want to max out multiple skills, but from my character builds, you'll know that most skills aren't all that great. Coercion is great on your Warden if you want to be able to persuade and intimidate people, and combat training is a must-have on rogues and warriors, though only optional on mages to allow them to take more damage before it interrupts their spellcasting. You only really need herbalism on one character, same thing with maxing out poison making, since otherwise to use grenades and poisons you just need 1 point in the skill. Combat tactics is only useful if you really need the extra tactic slots for a companion to automate their behavior in combat. Stealing is kind of meh, though there are a few special items you can get with it. And survival is that one skill that you can put points into when you have nothing else, since it gives you a bit of nature resistance. In my opinion, there simply aren't enough high-value skills for the rogue's extra skill points to matter all that much. Let's talk about the most important stats the rogue is interested in. Due to the two build archetypes being quite different from each other, I'll explain the preferred stats by each archetype. Starting with the stats for a scrapper rogue. Dexterity and cunning are the main attributes that will increase the damage and effectiveness of a melee rogue. Dexterity allows you to equip higher tier daggers, increases dagger damage, increases melee attack score, defense, and allows you to unlock higher tier dual wielding talents. Cunning increases armor penetration, increases the effectiveness of various rogue talents, either combat abilities or stealing and lockpicking. For your Warden, specifically, it also increases persuasion, possibly meaning that you don't have to max out the coercion skill on your rogue Warden. There are also a few special dialogue options opened up by your Warden having higher cunning scores. However, the real reason why cunning is really good for rogues is that there's a passive ability in the rogue tree called lethality. You see, weapons have a damage bonus based on a particular attribute, which for most melee weapons is strength. Daggers scale with both strength and dexterity in equal amounts, but rogues aren't much interested in increasing their strength normally. Lethality allows rogues to use the cunning score instead of strength as a damage modifier for their weapon if their cunning is higher, which of course, generally speaking, is what you want. So because of lethality, a lot of melee rogues prefer to only get enough points in dexterity to unlock the highest tier daggers and certain dual wielding talents, and put most of the rest of their points into cunning. Since cunning also increases the effectiveness of a few really good combat talents, it's great to have it as your main focus when you're a melee rogue, since it both adds attribute-based damage to your weapon and makes your talents more effective. The thing is, though, there isn't only one correct answer when it comes to attributes. If you want to play as a rogue using a larger melee weapon in combination with a dagger instead of just 2 daggers, then you'll obviously need to invest points into strength to be able to equip these heavier weapons. In that case, since you're already investing in strength, there isn't much point in trying at the same time to put points into cunning to use the lethality passive. So you'd instead mostly focus on strength and dexterity if that's the kind of build you want to go for. The good news is that as a rogue, you don't really need much in terms of stamina or health, so you can mostly ignore the willpower and constitution attributes. I still like to put a few points into constitution, maybe 5 or so in total, to make my characters slightly less squishy, but that's about it. So to summarize, focus on your 2 main attributes, either dexterity and cunning for dual daggers, or strength and dexterity for a larger weapon plus a dagger in the offhand. You may want a few points in cunning anyway to unlock higher tiers of the stealing and coercion skills, as well as the lockpicking/disarming talents in the rogue tree. The important stats for a scrapper, other than attributes, are these: attack, defense, dodge chance, damage bonuses, critical chance, and critical damage. Since your scrapper will be engaged in melee with various enemies and thus in danger of being targeted by various abilities and spells that can knock them down or stun them, I also recommend being on the lookout for a bit of physical resistance, which may help them resist these effects. Attack is a crucial stat that determines how likely your character is to hit an enemy with their weapon attacks, and with talents that use an attack roll. You increase your attack naturally by investing in strength and dexterity, though dexterity only gives you half the amount of attack compared to strength and melee. You can also get direct bonuses to attack from gear and various abilities. Defense helps the character avoid physical attacks in combat by comparing your defense to the enemy's attack score, not only affecting melee attacks but also ranged ones. You'll mostly get higher defense from investing in your dexterity attribute, but there are also a few gear pieces and abilities that can increase it. In particular, the Duelist Specialization, which I'll discuss in detail in the Specializations section, is great for defense bonuses. Dodge chance gives your character a percentage chance to avoid a physical attack entirely, without caring about the enemy's attack score. This only applies to attacks that require an attack roll, so unfortunately some enemy abilities that cannot miss, such as the Ogre's Ram, the Golem's Slam, or an Archer's Scattershot, will still hit you even if you have full dodge chance, as they cannot be dodged. Dodge chance is calculated before defense is factored in, and so if you have a decently high chance to dodge and combine that with a high defense, your character will be able to avoid most melee or ranged physical attacks and thus be able to keep damaging enemies even if they're targeted by them. Damage bonuses, or extra damage of a certain element, are extremely useful to help your scrapper deal more damage with every single hit. To a lesser extent, bonuses to damage against a certain enemy type can also be useful, though these are obviously more situational. First and foremost, the easiest way to increase your melee damage is by getting a higher tier weapon that inherently has a higher base damage, and by putting points into the attribute that increases the damage of your weapon. For daggers, you can increase their damage by investing in strength or dexterity, or otherwise dexterity and cunning if you're using the lethality passive. For heavier melee weapons like longswords, maces, and axes, they scale with strength and also have strength equip requirements, so the best thing to do is to put points in strength to increase their damage. However, weapons and items can also have various damage bonuses that help you out further. Certain weapons have plus X damage bonuses as part of their item properties, and others have plus X element damage, though those are quite rare. You can get extra elemental damage by adding elemental runes such as frost, flame, or lightning runes to your weapons, or having one or more mages using weapon enchantment spells such as frost weapons or flaming weapons. Additionally, you can have weapons with plus damage versus darkspawn, undead, or dragons, or add to your weapon silverite runes for damage versus darkspawn, or cold iron runes for damage versus undead. If you know that you are mostly going to deal with one of these enemy types during a quest or in a certain area, you can prepare in camp by adding these runes to your weapons, thus increasing your scrapper's effectiveness against that enemy type. Critical chance and critical/backstab damage bonuses are great for rogue scrappers who focus on critical hits, backstabs, or both to do most of their damage. Critical chance is a percentage chance for your character's attacks to deal a critical strike on the enemy, which deals at a base level 150% of your normal attack damage. There aren't all that many sources of crit chance on gear, so most of your crit chance bonuses will come from various passive abilities and specializations. Critical backstab damage bonuses increase the amount of damage that critical strikes and backstabs do, so that base 150% can be increased with bonuses you can usually find on gear, especially on weapons. The gear bonus caps at plus 200%, which means that the maximum amount of damage your critical hits or backstabs can deal is 350% of normal attack damage. I'm not really sure that it's possible to reach this plus 200% cap in Origins, since there aren't that many gear pieces with crit backstab damage bonuses, though it may be possible in the Awakening expansion through a combination of gear and expansion abilities. Moving on to archer stats. In order to make archery viable, you first and foremost need rapid aim bonuses on your gear. You likely know my stance on min-maxing. I don't like doing it, but the truth is that if you don't optimize archery at least to some extent, it will suck and you'll be wondering why it's even an option in the game. Rapid aim is the stat that will make archery feel good. Without it, bow basic attacks are too slow. You won't be able to find rapid aim on many pieces of gear. Most of them are on light armor pieces, though some are also directly found on bows, which is great. Once you have an item with a good rapid aim bonus, you can then use the aim sustained, which greatly improves your auto attacks while slowing down your attacks. But since you have rapid aim, your archer won't be slowed down by the range speed penalty of aim. Other than rapid aim, you're interested in only one attribute, which is dexterity, and then attack, critical chance, critical/backstab damage, and bonuses to damage. Dexterity is the only attribute your rogue archer needs because it increases their attack score for ranged attacks, ranged damage, and also allows them to equip higher tier short bows and long bows. You'll want to invest most of your rogue's attribute points into dex whenever you level up, and also look for dexterity or plus to all attributes bonuses on gear wherever you can. If you're curious about crossbows, they require strength to equip, their damage doesn't scale with any attribute, and they just tend to be bad in general, so you don't really care to use them. You may of course need to increase your strength to equip high tier light armors if you aren't using the dexterity light armor mod. I do also recommend increasing your stamina a little bit, ideally through gear, but a few points into willpower are also useful. Attack is obviously useful, just as for the scrapper, since it increases your chance to hit enemies with your shots. But since you're already investing so many points into dexterity, your archer's attack score will likely be just fine, so it's not a super high priority to get bonuses to it from gear. Critical chance and especially critical/backstab damage bonuses are great for archers because they get access to two very powerful talents that automatically crit: critical shot and arrow of slaying. Because of this, increasing your critical damage as much as you can is absolutely worth it. As I mentioned in the Scrapper stats section, the critical damage bonus cap from gear is plus 200%, and I don't think you can hit it in Origins. For critical chance, you won't get many gear bonuses to it, but it is worth looking for them wherever possible, because you're also going to increase your crit chance through the aim sustained. Keep in mind that you need to look for either critical chance or ranged critical chance. Archers obviously don't care about melee critical chance bonuses. General bonuses to damage are of course useful, however, you will find them far less plentiful than those of melee weapons. There are a few bows with plus damage, as well as some plus damage versus a certain enemy type. However, you will not find elemental damage bonuses on any bows, you can't add any runes to them, and weapon enchantment spells such as flaming or frost weapons don't work either. Other than the basic plus damage bonuses, you can only improve the damage done by your bows by equipping special arrows that deal extra damage of a certain element. Some of this special ammunition can also have other effects, such as a chance to stun or interrupt spellcasting, but keep in mind that these arrows and bolts are finite as you consume them when you attack, and other than the ones you can loot from some enemies or containers, they are expensive if you want to purchase them from merchants. Generally speaking, I don't bother with special ammunition, but I know that in certain boss fights or other difficult encounters, having the extra damage or the chance to stun can be useful. Since archers are ranged characters, you can see that they don't really care about defensive stats so much. Of course, they may still get targeted by an assassin-type enemy or deal enough damage to draw the attention of other nearby enemies, but if you have a good tank warrior, the tank should be able to quickly and easily draw the enemy aggression onto themselves and away from the archer if that happens. If you're doing some funky build or even a solo challenge as an archer, you may be far more interested in defensive stats like dodge chance and defense, but a regular archer should just focus on offensive stats. Finally, before we move on from stats, I need to mention a special stat. I generally think that armor penetration is a good offensive stat to get bonuses to on your gear. AP reduces the effectiveness of the target's armor against your attacks. However, I've realized that rogues in particular don't really need AP bonuses for a few reasons. 1. You're already using weapons with higher base AP like daggers or bows. 2. You have access to some damaging talents that come with bonus AP included. 3. Any points you invest into cunning also increase your AP. More importantly, I've looked at many enemies' armor scores in the Dragon Age toolset, and most of them have fairly small amounts of armor. Only boss rank enemies like High Dragons, the Archdemon, and the Broodmother have really high armor scores. Even then, the highest that I've seen it go is 37 for the Broodmother, the Archdemon has around 35 based on my calculations, and most other bosses have way less than that. Sir Carthrion during Rescue the Queen, for example, only has 21 armor, and she's wearing tier 7 gear. Not only are there various abilities that can increase your AP, an archer's aim, a mage's telekinetic weapons, which increases the AP of all melee characters in the party, or Shale's fully upgraded Stone Aura, which increases every party member's AP, whether they're melee or ranged, but you also have various combat abilities that temporarily reduce an enemy's armor, or which have an automatic AP bonus to their attack roll. An archer's critical shot has a bonus to AP for its attack. Shattering Shot reduces the target's armor by 10 for the next 20 seconds. A melee rogue's Deadly Strike has extra AP for its attack. A two-handed warrior's Sunder Armor reduces the target's armor by a huge 20 points for the next 10 seconds, and so on. So the conclusion regarding armor penetration is that yes, it's a useful stat, but don't go out of your way to get it. If it's included as part of an item that has other good stats, then great. But if other items which don't have bonuses to AP fit your build better, don't worry about it. You'll be just fine with a lower armor penetration score. These have been the most important stats to look for as a rogue, whether as a scrapper or an archer. Now that you understand what rogues generally like, let's get into the abilities they have access to, starting with the rogue tree. It has 4 rows consisting of 4 talents each, though 2 of them are essentially skills with multiple ranks instead of combat talents. The first row contains 1 active talent, 2 passives, and 1 sustained. Dirty Fighting is a super useful incapacitating talent that stuns the target for a maximum of 4 seconds, with the duration being affected by the target's rank. The best part about this talent is that there is no resistance check, so unless the enemy is completely immune to stuns, it's a guaranteed effect. Dirty Fighting is also the most effective ability to use to counter an ogre or dragon's grab attack, because the stun effect is coded to always end a grab, even if the target is immune to stuns. Obviously, you need to have the ability off cooldown so you can use it if the enemy tries to grab you, But it is really effective if you don't have other ways to save yourself or other party members from it, like with force field on your ally or a paralysis effect on the enemy. I always unlock Dirty Fighting on all my rogues, even archers, because other than using it against grabs or else offensively, you can also use it defensively to stun an enemy who's attacking you and run away. Combat Movement is a passive that allows your rogue to perform a backstab attack on enemies anywhere from even just slightly behind them, not just from a narrow angle. It also increases the maximum flanking attack bonus your rogue receives from 15 to 20, and the flanking crit bonus from 3% to 4% for ranged attacks with bows when you shoot an enemy from behind, of course. Lastly, it adds plus 2% melee crit chance. I would say that for archers, this ability isn't really worth it unless you have the spare points, because mostly this just helps out dual-wielding rogues so they can backstab enemies more easily. Coup de grace is my favorite passive talent for dual-wielding rogues because it causes you to automatically backstab any enemy that is stunned or paralyzed, no matter what angle you're attacking them from. It also adds plus 1% melee crit chance. Combining the auto backstab from Coup de grace with paralyzed runes and daggers and other incapacitating talents from party members is the most fun and easy way to build a rogue, in my opinion. Feign Death is a sustained that makes your rogue collapse at the enemy's feet, causing the rogue to appear dead and thus making the enemies lose interest in attacking the rogue. This essentially means that after a small delay, the rogue's threat is reset. The character can still be hit by indirect damage from AoE spells and talents, and the ability is sustained until you manually deactivate the talent. The cooldown is 5 minutes. Personally, I've never found this ability useful, and after my first playthrough, never unlocked it again. The thing is that if you have a good tank who can taunt enemies frequently and generate a lot of threat, you don't really need a talent like Feign Death. You can just as well use Dirty Fighting or another talent that incapacitates an enemy who's attacking you and then run away. Or switch to another party member and use an incapacitating ability or spell on that particular enemy attacking your rogue, which stuns, freezes, paralyzes them, and so on. No need for Feign Death, which can only be used once in a fight anyway due to its incredibly long cooldown. The second row consists of 2 activated talents and 2 passives. Below the Belt is usually a mediocre talent that kicks the target, dealing normal combat damage and imposing penalties to the defense and movement speed of the target unless it passes a physical resistance check against the rogue's cunning. The reason why it's usually not worth using is that the damage of this talent is quite low compared to backstabs, dual-wielding talents, or archer auto-crit abilities. The only exception to this is if you're building an archer and you're spending most of your attribute points into dexterity, because then the damage of Below the Belt will also be greatly increased. But even as an archer, the point at which this talent becomes good enough to use is from the mid-game onwards. Deadly Strike is another active talent that I consider to be mediocre. With it, the rogue makes a quick strike with plus 10 attack and plus 10 armor penetration, dealing maximum weapon damage. This is an ability you can only use with a melee weapon, and while the ability can crit, once again I just don't think it's better than a backstab or one of the good dual-wielding talents. The only reason you'd want to pick this up is to gain access to the 2 great passives in this row. Lethality is a passive that allows the rogue to use their cunning score instead of strength as an attribute modifier for the damage of their weapons if their cunning score is higher. Additionally, it grants plus 10% melee crit chance. This is a really strong passive for melee rogues, both due to the big bonus to melee crit chance and the increase in damage from using cunning as an attribute for weapon damage. It also helps archers, though less since they don't get a crit chance bonus, since the damage of longbows and shortbows scales with strength and dex in equal measure, just like with daggers. However, if you're going to go all in on dexterity when you build your archer, your cunning score will likely not be all that high, so it may not be worth investing into lethality as an archer in that case. Finally, Evasion is a passive that grants a 20% chance to dodge, which also is accompanied by a dodge animation. Furthermore, the rogue is also granted a 20% chance to resist stuns, knockdowns, and slip effects. I personally play the game with the Dane's Fixes mod, which has a balance tweak that removes the evasion dodge animation, but even before Dane's Fixes was a thing, I wasn't bothered by it. It's up to you to decide if you want to use this mod tweak and if the animation bothers you otherwise in the vanilla game, but my personal recommendation is to absolutely get that juicy 20% bonus. The third row in the rogue talent tree is all about picking locks and disarming traps. All 4 talents, Deft Hands, Improved Tools, Mechanical Expertise, and Device Mastery, are passives that grant increasing bonuses to these actions, though your rogue's cunning score also contributes to your degree of success. Each rank of this talent adds 10 points to your cunning score for the purposes of picking locks and disarming traps. With an effective score of 70, you can pick every lock in the game, which means that you can have 70 cunning and require no ranks in this talent, or have 30 cunning plus all the ranks of this talent. Of course, you can also do something in the middle, like a score of 50 cunning and 2 ranks. This is what I tend to do on melee rogues who focus on increasing their cunning. I do find that picking locks especially is very useful for getting access to some powerful gear and extra money. Disarming traps is not necessarily as big of a deal, though there are certain combat encounters that become much more difficult if you can't detect and disarm traps. Finally, the last row is all about stealth. The first talent grants you access to the sustained talent that lets you sneak around, whereas the other 3 are upgrades to it. With only the first rank, you can only initiate stealth in exploration mode and can't do much other than walk around and loot stuff while avoiding enemies. If you attack while stealth, before breaking stealth, your first strike is an automatic critical hit or backstab. Using items or attacking will immediately break you out of stealth. One more useful thing about it is that if you use the stealing skill while stealthed, you get a bonus to your effective cunning score for the stealing attempt of 5 per rank of stealth. So for the purposes of stealing from high difficulty targets like Duncan, Gregoire, Irving, and so on, it can be useful to have a couple of ranks of stealth on top of your stealing skill and cunning. Rank 2 of stealth is stealthy item use, which, as the name implies, lets you use items such as grenades, potions, or poisons while sneaking. There is still a chance for stealth to be broken, I believe, but at least now there's a possibility of staying hidden. Very useful for chucking grenades at enemies if you're up against a difficult encounter that you may not otherwise be fully ready for, like for example the bounty hunters in the Frostback Mountains earlier on. Rank 3 of stealth is combat stealth, which allows you to initiate stealth while in combat mode, though there are caveats to this, such as no bosses being nearby. You also have a chance to maintain stealth when taking non-physical damage like an AoE damaging spell like Flame Blast, Fireball, or Blizzard. It's a low chance, mind you, only equal to your rogue's level, but it's nice that it's there. Rank 4 of stealth is Master Stealth, which grants you various bonuses. With this rank, you can enter stealth in combat even when there are regular bosses nearby. Not elite bosses though, those are too tough to fool. However, once in stealth, enemies can't detect your rogue at all. You also have a higher chance of maintaining stealth when taking non-physical damage. I do have some bad news about stealth though. If you are planning on using it to avoid most enemy encounters in the game, you can't. There is a weird combat system that DAO has, which causes you to be in combat mode or exploration mode. And unfortunately, you can't interact with area transitions while your party is in combat mode. So even if you successfully sneak past all the enemies in an area, if you don't have enough space between yourself and the enemies for the game to end combat mode, you won't be able to travel to the next level. In more open areas like the Korkari Wilds and the Brazilian Forest, you may be able to get away with sneaking past most enemy encounters, though you'll find that some are necessary to proceed with the main quest, or else the quest objective or area transition will be too close to a group of enemies for you to be able to proceed without killing them. And if this wasn't enough, the stealth upgrades are level gated, so even if you have the 22 cunning required for Master Stealth, you can't unlock it until your rogue is level 12. Rank 2 requires level 4, and Rank 3 requires level 8. Even with the weird combat mode situation, stealth would have been far more useful if you could upgrade it earlier in the game. Lots of potential combat encounters you could use stealth in with great effect, especially with Rank 3 allowing you to re-enter stealth even while in active combat. So with this lengthy explanation of why stealth kind of sucks out of the way, I will admit that in my regular playthroughs of DAO, I omit it entirely. You don't really need to use stealth to guarantee crits for a melee rogue, since against most enemies you can just position yourself behind them for a backstab, or else get the upgraded backstabs from coup de grace, which happen automatically if the enemy is paralyzed or stunned. Archers also have auto-crit abilities, critical shot, and arrow of a slaying, so unless you're trying to do a weird challenge run, a soul nightmare run, or something like that, stealth isn't really necessary. Next up, one of the 2 weapon styles that rogues have access to, the dual weapon tree. The dual weapon tree is my personal favorite for both rogues and warriors. It's quite well balanced, with most of the talents being useful in different builds, and of course you get the added bonus of wielding 2 weapons, which allows you to add runes to both of them. Similarly to other weapon styles, the dual weapon style has 3 rows of 4 talents each. Unlike the other weapon talents, all the passives in this tree are concentrated in the first row. Dual weapon training causes your offhand weapon to get the same attribute bonuses to damage as your main weapon. It effectively triples the damage the offhand weapon gains from attributes. A perfect early pickup to increase your character's damage. Dual weapon Finesse grants the character bonuses of +5 attack and defense while having 2 melee weapons equipped. Attack and defense bonuses are always welcome, attack especially early when you may be struggling to hit enemies consistently, and defense is great at all times to protect you from taking damage, so be sure to pick this one up relatively early too. Dual Weapon Expert grants your character plus 2.5% melee critical chance and also deals an amount of bleeding damage per hit to enemies. In the base game, the bleeding damage doesn't scale with a character level, even though it's supposed to, but as with most of the bugged abilities, Dane's Fixes sorts it out. The extra melee crit chance is great for rogues, though of course they also have the ability to essentially crit with their backstabs, so this third passive isn't necessarily something you need to get early, and if you really want to max out other areas, you could also skip it. Dual Weapon Mastery allows your character to use full-sized weapons in both hands. It also reduces your fatigue by 2.5% when dual wielding. For most rogues, aka those who are just going to use dual daggers, you don't really need this passive. The fatigue reduction isn't important because dagger rogues are already using light armor and barely have any fatigue from it, and you don't need the ability to use 2 full-sized weapons if you won't invest into strength to actually be able to equip these higher tier ones. However, if you want to play a rogue dual-wielding big weapons, perhaps a variation of my Duncan-inspired build that uses 2 full-sized weapons instead of just 1, you should obviously unlock this. The second row of the dual weapon tree has 1 sustained and 3 activated talents. Dual Striking is a sustained mode that causes your character to strike with both weapons at the same time, but makes your attacks unable to be critical hits. However, your damage is essentially doubled, and so this talent is useful if you can increase your attack speed through momentum or haste. Each weapon still does its own attack roll as part of this double swing, so one or both can miss, but if you have a good attack score from your dex and strength, you should be fine. Weapon buff spells such as Flaming Weapons are applied for each weapon, so you'll get the bonus for both strikes. Critical hits are still possible in conjunction with auto-crit skills, such as an enemy being affected by the Death Hex spell, though rogues have more ways to achieve this by attacking out of stealth or using the Duelist talent Pinpoint Strike. I find this talent far better on warriors since they can't crit as easily as rogues, but in the early game when you may still struggle to get backstabs easily since you don't have combat movement and coup de grace yet, you could absolutely use dual striking to increase your rogue's damage output. It will eventually become far less useful than using crits and backstabs, but until then, it's good damage. Riposte is an activated talent that causes your character to strike at a target once, dealing normal damage, as well as stunning the opponent unless it passes a physical resistance check versus your character's cunning. Then you strike with the other weapon, generating a crit if the target was stunned. This is generally a great talent to use on rogues, since they will have a high chance to stun the target due to their high cunning score. Cripple is an activated talent that strikes low at a target with the strike having +5 attack and hitting critically if the attack connects. The target is debuffed for 10 seconds with -40% movement speed, -10 attack and defense unless it passes a physical resistance check versus the attacker's strength. Since this one relates to your strength, it's not as good to use on rogues as it is on warriors, unless you're a strength plus dex rogue. The debuff would be great to apply to an elite-type physical enemy like Herlock or Genlock alphas, ogres, revenants, and so on. Punisher is an activated talent that strikes 3 times against a target, dealing normal damage for the first 2 strikes, and generating critical hits for the final blow that uses both weapons if they connect. The target will be debuffed for 20 seconds with -10 attack and defense, and be knocked down unless it passes a physical resistance check against the attacker's strength attribute. Due to the resistance check being strength-based, this is also not as good on rogues as it is on warriors. Unless you're a strength plus dex rogue, I definitely skip this one. It's mostly just a waste of your stamina if you don't have a good chance of applying the debuff. The third row in dual weapons has 3 activated talents and 1 sustained. Dual Weapon Sweep is the best dual weapon activated talent by far due to dealing damage in a cone in front of the attacker. You strike out with both weapons and inflict 50% more damage than normal. The attack result is always a standard combat hit. It can't miss, but it can't crit either. There is a bug in the vanilla game where sometimes the talent can miss a target when it's standing directly in front of you, but if you have Dane's Fixes, it's resolved. But once again, I can't stress this enough. If you don't have this unlocked by default at the start of the game due to your origin, unlock it immediately. It does so much damage, it's cheap, and has a relatively low cooldown too, an essential dual-wielding talent. Flurry is an activated talent which strikes 4 times, 1 attack with both weapons, then 1 with the main hand and 1 with the offhand, executing this attack combo with much faster than normal speed. The hits can be critical, so this is quite good if you have a high crit chance. Personally, I don't tend to use this ability a lot since I just prefer using momentum to increase the attack speed of my rogue's basic attacks, and just use those either as backstabs from behind or as backstabs from the front once I have coup de grace. Flurry can be fine, but if your auto attacks are faster and better, then you don't need to bother with it. However, you do need to unlock it in order to get to the next ability. Momentum is a sustained talent that increases your character's attack speed by about 43%, although it also imposes a penalty of -2 stamina regeneration. In the vanilla game, there is a bug if you're using haste and momentum together, which causes you to lose the speed bonus, but Dane's Fixes solves this problem. In my opinion, momentum is one of the essential talents for dual wielders that you'll use because more attack speed equals more damage. The -2 penalty to stamina regen can be offset quite easily. You'll already have plus 0.5 stamina regen from the improved combat training skill, and you can get various bonuses to stamina regen from armor pieces, accessories, and even a few big weapons if you want to use a big weapon and dagger combo, or 2 big weapons. Whirlwind is an activated area of effect talent that damages enemies in a 2.5 meter sphere around the character. You strike out at surrounding enemies with both weapons, and each hit can be a critical. Normally speaking, I don't bother using this ability since my rogues are usually not surrounded by enemies, and so I prefer using dual weapon sweep for just 2 to 3 enemies. But in case you do actually have enemies surrounding you, then it would do a good amount of damage. Obviously, area of effect abilities are powerful, but since you already have dual weapon sweep, you could skip Whirlwind if you wanted to. The dual weapon tree is honestly one of those where no ability is truly useless, even if 2 or 3 of them are not as good depending on your build. For rogues, I generally recommend unlocking almost the entire tree other than dual weapon mastery, punisher, and maybe whirlwind. Moving on to the archery tree. Rogue archers can be extremely powerful as long as they're built correctly. In the archery tree, there are 3 rows of 4 talents each. The first row has 2 passives and 2 sustained talents. Melee Archer is a passive that allows your character to keep firing their arrows without interruption even when getting attacked. This is the most important ability that every archer must have immediately, because there are all sorts of combat scenarios where you will fight in constricted areas, and thus your archer is likely to get hit quite a lot, especially in the early game, so unlock this at the very start of the game. Aim is a sustained talent that doubles your critical chance from gear bonuses and grants plus 10 attack, plus 2 damage, and plus 3 armor penetration, while increasing aim time by 1.5 seconds. Master Archer increases the bonuses to these stats. This is an amazing and essential talent to use from the mid-game onwards. But in order to use it effectively, you first need to get gear with a rapid aim property to offset the aim time penalty of this talent. Until then, you can unlock other more useful abilities. Defensive Fire is a sustained talent that grants plus 15 defense while active, but increases aim time by 1.2 seconds. Master Archer doubles the defense bonus. Keep in mind that Rapid Shot, Aim, and Defensive Fire are mutually exclusive, so you can only have one of these active at a time. There might be situations where you want this active, like if perhaps you're trying to solo the game as an archer, but I personally have never used it. Master Archer is a passive that grants bonuses to many of your archery talents. Aim receives a bonus of plus 5 attack, plus 2 armor penetration, and plus 1 damage. Defensive Fire gets plus 15 defense. Crippling Shot and Arrow of Slaying get plus 15 attack each. Critical Shot gets plus 10 armor penetration. Rapid Shot gets an increased aiming speed bonus of 100%. Shattering Shot provides an additional minus 10 reduction of the target's armor. Finally, this passive eliminates the penalty to ranged attack speed when wearing heavy chest armor, although massive chest armor still carries the penalty. I don't really know why you'd want to wear heavy chest armor as a rogue, but hey, if you're doing a funky build, I guess you can do it without the attack speed penalty. The second row has 4 activated talents, all offensive in nature. Pinning Shot fires an arrow to the target's legs, pinning it in place for 8.5 seconds unless it passes a physical resistance check against the attacker's cunning score, and slowing movement speed by 50% otherwise. On hard or nightmare difficulty, even normal or critter enemies almost always resist this effect, so if you're playing on anything higher than normal, it's not really worth using. Just use an incapacitating ability or spell from another party member. Crippling Shot fires an arrow that debuffs the target for 20 seconds with minus 10 attack and defense if it hits. The hit can be critical. This is a pretty nice ability to use on physical elites and bosses, since the debuff duration isn't based on the enemy's rank, so you get to apply a powerful penalty to the enemy even if they're higher rank. I wouldn't use it on normal enemies though, since you can usually kill those quite easily and don't need to debuff them. Critical Shot fires an arrow that automatically scores a critical hit if it hits, and the attack also gets plus 10 armor penetration. Like any auto crit ability, this is great to use in order to shatter frozen or petrified enemies, or just straight up kill them with a huge amount of damage. To try to ensure you hit, it's good to have attack bonuses either from gear or party member abilities. You can use Critical Shot and Arrow of Slaying one after another to extremely quickly kill a pair of enemies at the start of combat. Speaking of, Arrow of Slaying is another auto crit if it hits, and it has an inherent plus 5 attack bonus. If the strike connects, not only is it a crit, but it deals double the normal critical hit damage, and the weapon damage is maximized. There's some additional bonus you can get if your archer is higher level than the enemy it's shooting, but there's far too much complicated math going on there to explain it. After using this ability, the archer suffers a penalty of -1 stamina regeneration for 10 seconds, so do be careful when using this. I recommend having more stamina regen bonuses than you strictly need, so that you don't accidentally deactivate your sustained talents in the middle of combat. The third row has 2 sustained talents and 2 activated ones. Rapid Shot is a sustain that reduces your aim animation by a maximum of 2 seconds, or 3 seconds if you have Master Archers, but it causes your hits to no longer be able to crit. Aim speed can only be reduced to 0. Most items with the rapid aim property reduce aim time by 0.3 seconds, so for longbows and shortbows which have an aim time of 0.3 and 0.2 seconds respectively, Rapid Shot becomes useless if you have an item with rapid aim on it. Rapid Shot is useful in the early game, before you get rapid aim gear, because shooting faster is preferable since you're not doing a lot of damage, plus you won't be able to crit much in the beginning anyway. Shattering Shot is an activated talent that deals normal damage if it hits, and reduces the target's armor by 10 for 20 seconds. Master Archer makes it reduce armor by a total of 20. Critter and normal rank enemies are also briefly knocked down when hit by this ability, interrupting their actions, but I don't know why you would use this on them since they likely have pretty low armor scores. I recommend using this against physical elites or bosses since they have a good amount of armor and you can get rid of most or all of it for your entire party to take advantage of for 20 seconds. Suppressing Fire is a sustained that causes each of your shots to apply a penalty of -7.5 attack for 10 seconds. The time is adjusted by enemy rank. This penalty can be applied multiple times on the same target. I believe you can use this mode in combination with either Rapid Shot, Aim, or Defensive Fire, but frankly, I don't know why you would. I'm not so well versed in archery, so I may be missing something. Do tell me in the comments if I am. But you can have other types of characters apply penalties to an enemy's attack and often defense at the same time, such as a dual wielder with Cripple or Punisher, a mage with Weakness, Miasma, or Disorient. If you're dealing with an elite or boss, you'd rather reduce their armor with Shattering Shot or straight up attempt to kill them with an auto-crit ability like Critical Shot or Arrow of Slaying. Not sure the attack penalty from this is worth it. Scatter Shot is an activated talent that fires a single arrow that automatically hits its target, stunning it and dealing normal damage. The arrow then shatters, hitting all nearby enemies with the same effect. The stun duration isn't very long, only 2 seconds, and it's also adjusted by enemy rank. However, the fact that it automatically hits the stun can't be resisted unless a creature is immune to stuns, and it also stuns all nearby enemies is amazing. In addition to normal damage, this ability deals 15 bonus damage. Up to 10 hostile secondary targets within 15 meters of the primary target are hit. Line of sight from the primary target to the secondary ones is required for this to happen. In the vanilla game, if the primary target is killed by a scatter shot, the secondary targets won't be hit, but Dane's Fixes solves this. I'm guessing that using scatter shot in combination with suppressing fire may actually be the one situation where suppressing fire is good, since the 15 bonus damage is dealt as a separate instance, and because of this, all targets will be debuffed twice, applying a total debuff of -15 attack to all of them. Personally, that is a bit too complicated for my tastes, so for my archers, I use the basic combo of rapid aim gear plus the aim sustained, and mostly auto attacks with the occasional auto crit ability on spellcasters or elites, and shattering shot on highly armored targets. Though do keep in mind that I mostly don't play archers other than building Liliana as the archer, so take everything I say with a grain of salt. Next, let's discuss the specializations rogues have access to. You'll be able to unlock 2 specializations as you get 1 specialization point at level 7 and another one at level 14. The 4 rogue specializations are Assassin, Bard, Duelist, and Ranger. The Assassin is good for dual wielders to increase their damage, as well as the party's damage on a marked enemy when using Mark of Death. The Bard offers utility to the entire party with 2 sustained songs. The Duelist gets bonuses to attack and defense, but is generally more useful for dual wielders since Pinpoint Strike and Upset Balance can only be used while wielding a melee weapon. And finally, the only thing Ranger does is summon an animal companion that can act as a decently tanky frontline fighter, so it's mostly a utility or support thing. The Assassin is the most aggressive specialization, focused on increasing the power of your rogue's backstabs and killing enemies faster. Unlocking the specialization grants the rogue +2 dexterity and +2.5% melee crit chance, which are great for a dual dagger scrapper. This specialization has 1 active talent and 3 passive bonuses. Mark of Death is a really powerful activated talent that marks the target to receive 20% more damage for 20 seconds from all sources. This means you're increasing all of your party members' damage against that target, which makes it particularly useful against elites and bosses. In particular, tanky elites because they have more health and defenses and will take longer to kill than a squishy elite like an assassin or spellcaster. Do note that Mark of Death does not stack with itself, so it's not worth trying to use it from multiple rogue party members on that one target at the same time. Exploit Weakness is a passive that grants the rogue additional damage for each of their backstabs. This bonus scales with the rogue's cunning, so it can get quite significant if you invest heavily into cunning. Lacerate is a passive that adds some bleeding damage over 4 seconds on the target whenever the rogue's backstab deals at least 10 damage. The effect won't stack if you're doing backstab after backstab on the target, but it's a nice little bonus to get. Not terribly useful, but you may want to pick this up so that you can unlock the final passive in the tree. Feast of the Fallen is a passive that restores some of the rogue's stamina whenever they kill an enemy with a backstab. This isn't as useful as the warrior's Deathblow passive, which restores stamina on any kill you perform, so it's only useful if your build relies heavily on backstabs, like using coup de grace to proc backstabs on paralyzed or stunned enemies. The amount of stamina restored is 5 times the enemy's level, so especially later on in the game it's a big chunk of your stamina. I like it, but if you're doing a weirder type of dual-wielding rogue that isn't backstabbing often enough, then there's no point in picking this up. The Bard is the most support-like specialization of the rogue, since it can provide buffs for the entire party. Unlocking the specialization grants the rogue +2 willpower and +1 cunning. The willpower bonus isn't amazing, but fine as far as unlock bonuses go. This specialization has 3 sustained abilities and 1 activated talent. Song of Valor is a sustain that grants the entire party extra mana or stamina regeneration based on the rogue's cunning score. The problem with this sustained is that the regen bonus is too small. So even with a score of 60 cunning, your party would only get 1 or 2 extra ability uses out of it. And the rogue sustaining this skill will require the fight to last for quite a long time to recoup the 50 stamina cost of sustaining it. I do think that if you have multiple party members who require high mana or stamina regen due to sustained abilities like Momentum, Haste, Shimmering Shield, and so on, you could benefit from adding a bit of extra regen on top of what those characters already have on their gear in order to be able to sustain those abilities. Your rogue would have to invest super heavily in cunning though, since you need 60 cunning in order to get up to 0.5 points regenerated per second. Distraction is an activated talent that dazes a target for 5 seconds if it fails a resistance check against the rogue's cunning, and also resets threat for all party members on that target to 1. Essentially, the target forgets who it was targeting, so you have time to reposition your squishy allies farther away from it in those 5 seconds. I personally don't use this talent all that much, since I prefer to just use Taunt on a tank to keep enemies from attacking my squishies, and there's plenty of other incapacitating talents you can use. Distraction has a huge cooldown of 30 seconds, so in most fights you'd only be able to use it once or twice. Still, it can be a nice talent to have to get your bard out of a spot of trouble if a big enemy is attacking them, and it of course allows you to unlock the next ability. Song of Courage is the better sustained in the tree, granting the entire party bonuses to attack, damage, and critical chance. Obviously, this will help out your melee fighters, including arcane warriors and archers the most, whereas regular mages will only benefit from the extra damage for their staff basic attacks. This is because staff projectiles always hit so they don't care about attack, and they can't crit so crit chance does nothing. But certainly if you have 2 or more party members who can benefit from this, it's a very powerful effect. Just like Song of Valor, it scales with the rogue's cunning. One important thing to keep in mind is that you can't have multiple songs active at the same time, and so for most situations I recommend Song of Courage. Captivating Song is the final sustained which stuns enemies in a 4-meter sphere around the rogue for 3 seconds, unless they pass a mental resistance check versus the rogue's cunning attribute every 4 seconds. Continuing the song doesn't drain stamina, but the drawback is that the rogue can't move or take any other action while singing. Personally, I haven't really used this sustain since I prefer my rogue to be able to keep doing damage, but there is one really interesting combination you could try, which is to activate Captivating Song on the rogue, and then have your mage cast Force Field on the rogue to make them immune to damage. Force Field won't negate the effects of this ability, and since your rogue can't move, the paralysis effect won't bother them. I assume the best type of combat encounter to use this combo for would be something in a tight space or enclosed combat arena, hallways and rooms in estates or ruins like Redcliffe Castle, the Arl of Denerim's estate, and the Ruined Temple in Haven. You could then go ahead and cast an AoE damaging spell on top of those stunned enemies like Fireball, Blizzard, Tempest, and so on. The Duelist is a very solid specialization for both rogue archetypes due to granting bonuses to attack and defense, but it's far better for dual wielders since 2 of its abilities are only usable if you're wielding a melee weapon. Still, you may want to pick this specialization up even as an archer, because unlocking it grants the rogue +2 dexterity and +1 damage. These are the best specialization unlock bonuses rogues get by far. Personally, I tend to pick this specialization up first for the great unlock bonuses, as well as the super useful sustained ability we'll talk about in a bit. This specialization has 1 sustained ability, 1 passive upgrade for it, and 2 activated talents. Dueling is a sustained talent that grants the rogue +10 attack while it's active. If you upgrade it with a Keen Defense upgrade, it will also grant +10 defense. I find that this is a nice sustain for rogues of all kinds, if you don't have a hyper-specific build in mind that needs 2 other specializations, because you can always make use of attack and defense bonuses. Upset Balance is an active ability that imposes penalties on an enemy of -20% movement speed and -20 defense, unless the target passes a physical resistance check versus the rogue's cunning. The duration of these negative effects is 10 seconds, and it's adjusted by enemy rank. Unfortunately, you can only use this talent if you have a melee weapon equipped, so an archer won't be able to take advantage of this unless they switch their weapon set to a melee one for a little bit. The defense debuff is the main thing you're interested in here, and in particular this would be useful against elite or boss rank enemies that are physical, since they may have higher defense scores and thus be harder to hit. I don't think this ability is one of the best, however, but it does grant you access to the other 2 in the tree. Keen Defense is a passive that improves the dueling sustained, adding +10 defense to the rogue while dueling is active. A great upgrade that will make your rogue less likely to be hit. Pinpoint Strike is an activated talent that makes an enemy weak to your duelist's attacks. What this effectively does is that it turns your duelist's attacks into auto-crits onto the target for the next 15 seconds. Each attack will be a critical hit, unless your rogue is backstabbing, in which case, of course, it counts as a backstab. This is important because if you're backstabbing, you could get certain benefits that only apply to backstabs, like the ones from the Assassin specialization. This talent may work for both your ranged and melee attacks, but you need to first activate it while wielding a melee weapon. However, it seems to not work with all versions of the game. On Steam, for example, I've heard from other people that the talent goes away when you switch from melee to ranged weapons. There are a few situations where Pinpoint Strike would be useful too. One is fairly straightforward. You're a dual-wielding rogue and you want to kill a fairly tanky enemy faster with your auto attacks. Maybe you can't backstab them easily, so in that case using Pinpoint Strike to turn your attacks into critical hits will greatly increase your damage for the next 15 seconds, which makes it much easier for you to kill the target. I'd use this on physical elites or bosses of any kind, since otherwise squishy elites like spellcasters or demons are fairly easy to kill since they don't have a lot of health or armor. Another interesting use case for Pinpoint Strike is if you're using the dual striking sustain from the dual weapon tree. That sustained normally makes all of your attacks have 0% crit chance, but if you use Pinpoint Strike while having dual striking active, you can turn all of your attacks into crits due to how the weird scripting for these abilities works. The reason you may want to turn on dual striking before using Pinpoint Strike is that you'd effectively double the damage of your attacks since you're attacking with both weapons at the same time. But this time, you're not losing out on potential critical damage. Instead, you're adding that extra crit damage to every attack. So I think this is a great combo that isn't used very often, mainly because it's a hassle to remember to turn off dual striking afterwards, but also because Pinpoint Strike has a huge cooldown of 180 seconds. I do have a quick tip for the cooldown though. If you finish a fight and it's still on cooldown, save and reload the game and your cooldown timer will be reset. As you can see, the actual abilities of the Duelist are a bit weird, and unfortunately are mainly meant for melee characters. I still think the unlock bonuses are really powerful, and the dueling sustained is great even without upgrading it, a very cheap plus 10 attack bonus that will help you hit enemies more frequently. Not that rogues generally have trouble with that, but still. Finally, the Ranger is a bit of an ugly duckling compared to the other specializations. Summoning an animal companion can be somewhat useful since you're adding an extra decently tanky melee character to your party, but at the same time, if you have a good tank warrior in the party already, you don't really need the summoned beast. I think this specialization works best if you're doing not just a weird build, but a weird party composition, something like a full archer party or 3 archers plus Morrigan as a shapeshifter. It can be done, but I don't recommend it unless you're choosing to do it as a fun challenge. Unlocking this specialization grants an incredibly disappointing +1 constitution and +5 nature resistance. While unlock bonuses aren't that important compared to the abilities you gain access to, these are terrible, and they're also combined with abilities that aren't that good. So overall, the Ranger ends up being extremely underwhelming. Anyway, this specialization has 3 mutually exclusive sustained abilities, the different summonable creatures, and 1 passive that upgrades all of them. Summon Wolf is a sustained ability that summons a wolf companion. The wolf will have access to the Howl ability as a baseline, and the Shred ability if you upgrade your summons with the Master Ranger passive. It's also upgraded to a Blight Wolf with Master Ranger, which of course changes its visuals but also its stats. These abilities are the same as the ones that the dog has access to, so I won't go into a lot of detail. Howl reduces the defense of nearby enemies, and Shred is an auto crit that does some extra bleeding damage to targets that have blood. There's some weird stuff you can do by clicking on the notification of having tactic slots available when you summon the wolf. If you manage to do that quickly enough while the notification is on the screen, you may be able to assign some extra abilities like Overwhelm, Shred, and Dread Howl to the wolf so that it can also use those. And with Master Ranger, it will also have Charge and Growl in the tactics screen. But personally, I find this to be very annoying since you have to do it every time you summon the animal, so I don't recommend it. If you really want to go through setting up the wolf's tactics every time you summon it to have these extra abilities, go ahead. Summon Bear is a sustained ability that summons a bear companion. The bear has the Slam ability as a baseline and the Rage ability if you upgrade it with Master Ranger. Its creature type also changes from Black Bear to Great Bear if upgraded. Slam is a talent that is an auto crit if it hits, and also knocks the target down unless it passes a physical resistance check versus the bear's strength. Rage is an ability that increases the bear's strength by 10 for 30 seconds, while reducing its defense by 15. You can do the same weird thing with the tactics notification that appears when you summon the bear in order to assign the Rage ability to the bear even before you acquire Master Ranger. But unfortunately, the bear doesn't get any other abilities, so it's pretty lame to go through the effort of adjusting its tactics every single time you summon it just for a slightly earlier Rage. And once you have Master Ranger, absolutely nothing. Summon Spider is the final sustained, which lets you summon a giant spider normally and a poisonous spider if you have Master Ranger. The summon will have the Web ability baseline and also Poison Spit if upgraded. Web immobilizes a target and Poison Spit deals nature damage over time to a target. Nature damage isn't great since most enemies such as Darkspawn and Undead are resistant to it or in some cases even immune, so the Spider summon is the weakest out of the bunch. Master Ranger is a passive that upgrades all of the summon abilities you have as a Ranger. Other than the changes I've already mentioned under each animal, you also get some additional bonuses. Your summoned animal will be 90% of your Ranger's level, up from the baseline 75%, with its stats also increased due to that, and your summoned animal will get 2.5 combat health regeneration up from the baseline of 0. I do think the wolf and bear changes and stat increases are decent, so if you want to have a relatively tanky character to do some extra melee damage in your party, it's not terrible to use a wolf or bear. Wolves are better, especially if you add the additional talents through the tactics notification, but bears are tankier, so they will last longer without needing to be healed by a mage. I will say that it is entirely possible to make a Ranger work well if you build a party around this idea, just like I mentioned at the beginning of the Ranger section. Aki's Haircheck, for example, has a video about a 3-Ranger party plus a shapeshifter mage, and while it is possible to beat the game with it, it's more of a gimmick or challenge type of party. I certainly wouldn't recommend it for beginners or for people who struggle with DAO's combat in general. I don't bother using this specialization, and I find the other 3 far more useful, even if just for the unlock bonuses and 1 or 2 abilities. But even so, this specialization is still better than the mage's shapeshifter one, so that's something. Before we move on from the rogue abilities, I want to mention 2 more special talents that are in their own category, part of the Power of Blood tree. These can be unlocked only on your Warden as part of the Warden's Keep DLC by drinking the alchemical concoction. I think the rogue gets some pretty nice abilities, one of which doesn't even have any drawbacks. Dark Passage is a passive that grants the rogue plus 5% dodge chance, and additionally a plus 20% movement speed bonus while using stealth. You may not really care about using stealth all that much, but even just the plus 5% dodge chance is a great bonus to get since you're more likely to avoid enemy attacks entirely, on top of already likely having high defense due to investing a lot of points into dexterity. The Tainted Blade is a sustained talent that grants the rogue a damage bonus based on their cunning. While activated, it drains 10 health every 2 seconds, and keeping the talent up reserves 40 stamina from your total. The damage bonus is pretty good, since it's a base of 5 plus your rogue's cunning minus 10 times 0.2. For example, if your rogue has 30 cunning, that would be a total damage bonus of plus 9. It ends up being very similar to the Berserk sustain that the warrior has, while of course having the drawback of draining your health. If you do plan on using this, I recommend getting some bonuses to health and constitution, maybe even investing a few points into constitution yourself when leveling up, so that your rogue isn't as squishy and can withstand the health drain for a while. High health regeneration, like from the Life Giver ring, also helps offset the health drain. Of course, a mage in your party who can heal your party with heal and group heal is ideal, though you could also just stock up on cheap health poultices. One more thing to mention about this talent is that in the vanilla game there is a bug that incorrectly applies the bleeding damage from Dual Weapon Expert to your rogue, but Dane's Fixes takes care of that. Personally, most of the time I don't bother with the health drain from the Tainted Blade and just pick up Power of Blood for the dodge chance bonus from Dark Passage, but it can be really useful as long as you're prepared to offset the HP loss. Let's move on to gear recommendations. I'm not going to go through every item in the game because no one has time for that. I'm going to remind you of the important stats to look for in gear and highlight key items that will be useful for rogues. First, I'll mention armor pieces and accessories that will be useful for both scrappers and archers. I generally recommend using light armor for both, unless there's a really good medium piece that you want to equip, or if you're doing a more hybrid strength-based rogue who will be fine with equipping heavier armor. There are only a few special light chest pieces in the game, and they're all pretty good. Battle Dress of the Provocateur is tier 7 and grants plus 4 dexterity, plus 5 armor, plus 15% dodge chance, plus 0.5 combat stamina regen, and plus 50 stamina. It's obtained by completing an achievement in the Liliana's Song DLC, and will be available in your inventory in the main game afterwards. The Felon's Coat is the best base game tier 7 chest piece. It grants plus 6 dexterity, plus 9 defense, plus 4 armor, plus 1 combat stamina regen, and plus 15 physical resistance. Due to the higher dexterity bonus, I'd use this one on archers, whereas the battle dress I'd use on scrappers due to the dodge chance since they're more likely to get attacked. Unfortunately, you can only buy this chest piece from Heren in Wade's Emporium and Denerim after completing 3 main quests. And you also have to make sure you're still on speaking terms with Heren, so don't commission the second Drake scale set until after you buy the Felon's Coat. Once you give Wade the second batch of Drake scales, Heren will no longer trade with you. Shadow of the Empire is a pretty good piece, though not as good as the first 2. It's also tier 7 and grants plus 2 strength, plus 2 dexterity, and plus 1 combat stamina regen. It's purchasable from Legnar and the Orzammar Commons. Finally, there is a nice basic armor set you can get earlier in the game before you buy the Felon's Coat or Shadow of the Empire, and for cheaper too. The Dalish Leather Armor Set. Honestly, this can't even be called basic since it actually has bonuses on each armor piece, and its set bonus is way better than anything you can get from the leather, studded leather, or duster sets. The Dalish chest piece and gloves grant plus 1 dexterity each, the boots grant plus 3 defense, and the set bonus is a further plus 5 defense. This is great for both archers and scrappers, and you can obtain Dalish armor quite easily by either buying it from Varathorn in the Dalish camp, or finding it as loot in the Brazilian forest. There's only one more light armor set to mention, Wade's Superior Drakeskin armor. You can craft this by giving Wade the second set of Drake scales, though as before, only do that after you buy what you want from Haren's updated stock once 3 main quests have been completed. But I don't think Wade's set is amazing. The stats are plus 4 dexterity, plus 70% fire resistance, and the set bonus itself is minus 10% fatigue and plus 5 defense. Since it's light armor, there's barely any fatigue to speak of, so you aren't really getting a lot of stamina out of that. The fire resistance is only useful against the High Dragon and a few mages or demons that have fire abilities. You can get this set for free though, as long as you have the Drake scales from Haven, so there's that. For helmets, the most solid options for rogues in general are Long Runner's Cap, a light helmet which grants plus 0.5 combat stamina regen, It can be found in Jammer's Box as part of the Jammer's Stash quest in the Carta Hideout in Orzammar, and it can also be looted from Jarvia in the Carta Hideout. Quicksilver Arming Cap is a light helmet that grants +2 Cunning and can be purchased from Legnar in the Orzammar Commons. The Free Scout Arming Cap is a light helmet that grants +2 Dexterity and can be looted from Tauron Hawkwind after killing him in the Blackstone Irregulars side quest, A Change in Leadership. This quest is only available if you complete all the previous Irregulars quests though, so I don't expect a lot of people can obtain this helmet. Finally, Helm of Honleith is an amazing DLC heavy helmet requiring 20 strength that grants +2 to all attributes and +3 armor. It can be found in Honleith Village as part of the Stone Prisoner DLC, and it's essentially a helmet that every character loves due to the bonus to all attributes. I recommend using it on warriors, but it's an option for your rogue nonetheless if you want it. For gloves, the best options for both archetypes are light gloves with critical or backstab damage and armor penetration. Qunari Siege Gauntlets grant +1.5 armor penetration and can be looted from the High Dragon on the mountaintop. Backhands grant +10% critical or backstab damage and can be purchased from Alamar in his Emporium in Orzammar's Dust Town. Red Jenny Seekers grant +15% critical or backstab damage. They're obtained after completing all the assassinations as part of the Trial of Crows questline given by Master Ignacio in the Denerim Tavern. The gloves also have a chance of appearing on the gang leader's corpse in the Dark Alley in Denerim during the Back Alley Justice side quest. For boots, the best thing you can get are defensive bonuses. Silverhammer's Tackmasters are light boots that grant +2 Dexterity and can be purchased from Bodan in the party camp. These are great for both archetypes, but even more so for archers who get more out of the dex bonus. Bard's Dancing Shoes are light boots that grant +6 defense and reduce hostility. They can be purchased from Bodan in the party camp, though they are quite expensive. The reduce hostility property is bugged in the vanilla game and doesn't do anything, but if you have Dane's Fixes, it correctly reduces the amount of threat generated by your character's attacks. If you use Dane's Fixes, these are way better. If not, I wouldn't bother with them. For a simpler option that you can possibly loot for free in the Brazilian Forest, the Dalish boots are a nice pickup since they grant +3 defense. As I mentioned, the Dalish set is quite nice, so don't sleep on these earlier on even if they're not as powerful as other pieces. Moving on to accessories. There are only a few good ones useful for both rogue archetypes. Andrul's Blessing is a belt that grants +2 to all attributes, +20% nature resistance, +1 combat stamina or mana regen, and +10 physical resistance. It can be purchased from the Quartermaster in the Circle Tower. It's extremely expensive though, and while its stats are great, I know that not everyone will be able to afford it as well as a lot of the other powerful yet expensive items in the game. Plus, basically everyone, regardless of class, loves this belt due to the +2 to all attributes, so you may not necessarily want to use it on a rogue because rogues are already pretty powerful, especially scrappers with backstabs. Cinch of Skillful Maneuvering is a DLC belt that grants +1 to all attributes, +10% spell resistance, and +10% dodge chance. You can obtain it by completing a Witch Hunt DLC achievement, and afterwards you'll have it in your inventory in the main game. I wouldn't necessarily equip a rogue with this, since due to the great spell resistance and dodge chance I'd much rather give it to a tank, but it's a decent option nonetheless. A final okay option for both archetypes is the simple Dalish Hunter's Belt, which grants +0.75 combat stamina regen and is purchasable from Bodan in the party camp. The DLC Amulet Pearl of the Anointed is decent since it grants +1 to all attributes, which makes it suitable for any archetype. However, it isn't anything special. If you want a more defensive amulet, I recommend either Mark of Vigilance, a DLC amulet, or Magister's Shield, which is obtained during the Denerim side quest, The Last Request. They both have similar bonuses to defense and spell resistance, though Magister's Shield is better and also has added defense against missiles. For rings, Key to the City is great as always because it grants +2 to all attributes, but again, it will be something that all characters are interested in. You can obtain it by doing the secret unmarked quest, The Key to the City in Orzammar. You just need to click on a bunch of codex entries around Orzammar for a cache with this ring to appear in the assembly. The Lucky Stone is a DLC ring that grants +1 to all attributes, a great simple option for any rogue. Harvest Festival Ring is a DLC ring that grants +2 strength and dexterity and +4 attack. You can loot it in Honleith as part of the Stone Prisoner DLC. I usually prefer to use this on a dual-wielding or weapon and shield warrior, but it can work nicely on a rogue due to the dexterity and attack bonuses especially. A very similar ring is Ring of the Warrior, which grants +2 strength and dex, and which you can obtain as part of the Drifter's Cache side quest in the Deep Roads. You'll likely get this one quite late though, and I similarly prefer to use it on my warriors. If you want to use the special Tainted Blade talent on your Rogue Warden for extra damage, I recommend picking up the Life Giver ring to offset some of the talent's health drain as well as give you a lot of extra HP. The ring grants +10 Constitution, +3 combat health regen, plus 10 exploration health regen, plus 3 armor, and plus 20% healing effects received. The healing effect bonus doesn't work in the base game, but Dane's Fixes properly implements it. Of course, you could also want to use this ring on a tank warrior to make them tankier, or on a blood mage so you can cast more spells with your HP. But it does also work very well for a rogue warden using the Tainted Blade. You can buy this ring for about 88 gold from Garen in the Orzammar Commons. That's pretty much it when it comes to gear that's generally good for rogues no matter the archetype. Now I'll move on to items specifically good for archers, because they require the most specific stats. In particular, as I mentioned in the stats section, they need items with rapid aim because otherwise your ranged shots and talents are too slow. The best items with rapid aim are repeater gloves, light gloves with rapid aim and plus 1 armor penetration. They can be looted as part of the Return to Ostagar DLC. Armsman's Tensioner, a tier 6 light helmet with rapid aim and plus 6 attack, which can be purchased from Varathorn's updated stock in the Duelist camp after completing 3 main quests. There are some longbows you can find with this property, such as Falondin's Reach, a longbow with plus 2 damage and rapid aim, which can be found in the Dragon's Hoard in the Brazilian Ruins upper level. The Sorrows of Arlathan grants plus 3 damage, rapid aim, plus 6% ranged crit chance, and plus 3 armor penetration, but you only get access to it in your inventory if you've completed the Scrying ritual in the Witch Hunt DLC. Spear Thrower is another decent bow with rapid aim and plus 2.5 armor penetration, which can be looted from the Genlock Forgemaster in the Dead Trenches in the Deep Roads. Personally, I'd use other bows since the armor penetration isn't really that great, but it's fine enough. For Liliana specifically, you can get a good longbow called Marjolain's Recurve as part of Liliana's personal quest, which grants plus 3 cunning, plus 3 damage, and has rapid aim, but this bow is restricted to Liliana only. There's of course Far Song, which has plus 2 damage, rapid aim, plus 3% ranged crit chance, plus 10 attack, and plus 10% critical damage, which can be purchased from the new blacksmith in Redcliffe if you kill Owen or refuse to save his daughter from the castle. Personally, I never suggest this option because Owen's fate should be purely a role-playing choice, not a choice made for a strong item that your character wouldn't actually know about. You could also choose a short bow instead of a longbow due to the inherently faster attack speed, but only one is worth it. Whitewood Bow, which grants plus 3 damage and plus 5% ranged crit chance, and can be looted in the Kadan Fey hideout as part of the Trial of Crows questline. It's okay that it doesn't have rapid aim, since its base attack speed makes up for it, though you'll still want rapid aim from another source for your talents. Other than rapid aim and good offensive stats on your bow, the main thing I recommend for archers is to look for bonuses to dexterity, since it'll increase your bow damage, attack, and defense stats. Ranged crit chance and critical damage are good too. The Long Sight is a light helmet that grants plus 5% ranged critical chance, and it's looted from the High Dragon on the mountaintop. If you're using something else for rapid aim bonuses than the repeater gloves, then for archer gloves, I'd recommend something that grants critical or backstab damage or armor penetration. I've already mentioned the best of those in the previous gear section. There's one interesting pair of boots to highlight for an archer, though they aren't much better than Silverhammer's Tackmasters, which I mentioned in the previous section. I'm talking about the medium boots Kadash Stompers, which grant plus 2 dexterity, plus 2 armor, plus 2 ranged and melee crit chance, and increased hostility. They require 22 strength to equip, so maybe you don't even care to increase your strength that much on an archer, but I do think the bonuses are pretty nice. Since you shoot enemies from afar, the extra hostility isn't that big of a deal, especially if you have a tank in your party who taunts enemies to attack them instead of your squishy party members. And in the vanilla game, the hostility-related properties don't work at all, in fact. It will only work properly if you have Dane's Fixes. You can obtain these boots as part of Shale's personal quest in the Deep Roads after you complete the Dwarven main quest. Longbowman's Belt is a belt that grants plus 2% ranged critical chance and can be purchased from Bodan in the party camp. It's not amazing or anything, but since there aren't many good belts for rogues and especially not for archers, you may enjoy the slight bonus to your ranged crit chance. I'm not going to recommend using special arrows for your archer because they don't really add very much to what your archer can already do. The Ice, Fire, and Filth arrows deal extra cold, fire, or nature damage respectively, but the damage is minor. Elf Flight arrows are pretty nice because they have plus 6 to attack and a chance to stun the enemy, but they're very expensive. There's only 40 available for sale in Varathorn's shop in the Dalish camp, and otherwise you can find a few of them scattered in the game. Andraste's arrows help interrupt spellcasting, but you should be able to do that by doing a lot of damage to an enemy mage anyway, so they're not useful either. As long as you build your archer correctly, you really don't need any special arrows. Feel free to keep some fire arrows if you want to, since the fire damage is at least effective against darkspawn and undead, but I personally recommend selling them so you can have more money to buy good gear. Finally, let's talk about items that a scrapper rogue is particularly interested in. A lot of the generally useful items are great for melee rogues, but there are of course weapons we need to talk about, daggers mostly, and a few scrapper specific items. I'll start with the armor and accessories first and talk about the daggers and weapons afterwards. Pushback strikers are light gloves that grant plus 5% melee crit chance and which can be looted from Jarvia in the Karta hideout in Orzammar. A 5% bonus to your crit chance is significant enough for me to highlight this as a good option for scrappers. There's a similar pair of gloves called Catriel's Grasp, available in Gorham's restocked inventory in Denrim after completing 3 main quests, but that one only has plus 3%, and Pushback Strikers is also free, so it's just way better. The Lion's Paw are light boots that grant plus 1 armor, plus 10% dodge chance, and plus 10 chance to avoid missiles. It's a promo DLC item that you should have in your inventory from the beginning of the game, and I generally recommend it for melee characters, since they're more likely to get hit by being in the middle of the action, and can thus make better use of the defensive stats. If you're playing a strength and dex scrapper, you may enjoy using the medium pair of boots Kadash Stompers that I mentioned in the archer section, since they increase your dex and melee crit chance. I personally use the Lion's Paw, or one of the generally good boots, and equip the Kadash Stompers on an archer, but it's a decent option for a scrapper too. As for medium chest pieces for a strength dex scrapper, there's only 2 good ones. Ancient Elven Armor is tier 4, requiring 22 strength, and grants plus 2 dexterity, plus 2 armor, and 10% spirit resistance. It's part of the Ancient Elven Armor set, but the set bonuses for that are only plus 5 defense, so I don't recommend using the entire set unless you really like what it looks like. You can loot this in the lower ruins in the Brazilian Forest. Varathorn's Armor is tier 6, requiring 30 strength, and grants plus 3 armor, plus 20% nature resistance, and plus 25 stamina. I'd usually use this chest piece on a 2-handed warrior or maybe an arcane warrior, but it's decent on a strength dex hybrid rogue. You can obtain this armor by completing the rare Ironbark quest in the Dalish camp and asking Varathorn to give you a breastplate as a reward. Guildmaster's Belt is the best belt I recommend for scrappers because it grants plus 3 cunning and plus 5% dodge chance. It's a promo DLC item that should be available in your inventory from the start of the game. The High Regard of House Dace is a DLC-related amulet that grants huge bonuses of plus 6 cunning, plus 7% melee crit chance, plus 1 combat stamina regen, plus 50 stamina, and plus 30 defense against missiles. It is the best amulet for a rogue damager with absolutely insane stats. But you have to complete an achievement in the Golems of Amgarak DLC to get this amulet, which is the hardest DLC in the game, so I won't judge you if you haven't been able to unlock this for the main game. Blood-Gorged Amulet grants plus 12 Constitution, but has a penalty of minus 3 Strength and Willpower. I'd only recommend using this one on a scrapper who's using Tainted Blade, since you'll have a full extra 60 health that can soak up some of the health drain of the talent. Duskring grants plus 3 Cunning and minus 1 Strength, so it's nice to use on a mainly cunning-based scrapper. You can obtain it by looting the chest near the abandoned campsite in the West Brazilian Forest, near the Grand Oak. The Wicked Oath is a ring that grants plus 10% crit or backstab damage, plus 1 armor penetration, and plus 1 combat stamina regen. I usually prefer to use it for 2-handed warriors because they need the stamina regen more than rogues, but it's a decent option for a melee rogue too. Moving on to the weapons favored by scrappers. Mostly, you're interested in daggers since they have high attack speed, high armor penetration, and also usually stats that are better for rogues. I will, however, also mention a few full weapons, aka longswords, axes, and so on, since in some cases, like with a strength plus dex rogue, you can take advantage of the higher base damage of a larger weapon alongside a dagger in the offhand. The things you're interested in when it comes to weapons are offensive stats: dexterity, cunning, crit or backstab damage, crit chance, armor penetration, and of course, simple damage bonuses. The best weapons will likely be tier 6 or 7, both because they tend to have better bonuses, but also because those high tier weapons will have 2 or 3 rune slots, allowing you to further increase your damage and effectiveness in combat with runes. There are quite a few really good daggers. Dead Taigshanker grants plus 5 cunning, plus 0.5 armor penetration, plus 6 attack, interrupts spellcasting, and has 2 rune slots. It can be looted as part of Shale's personal quest in the Deep Roads after you complete the Dwarven main quest. Duncan's Dagger grants plus 4 dexterity, plus 10% crit or backstab damage, plus 10 damage versus dragons, and 2 to 3 rune slots depending on what tier you get the item at. You can obtain it as part of the Return to Ostagar DLC, and you'll get it at a higher tier if you go to the DLC area later on when you're higher level. Around level 14 to 15 should probably be fine. The damage versus dragons isn't useful very often, really just in a few fights in the entire game, but the dex and crit or backstab damage are quite good. And if you want to honor Duncan by using his dagger, it's a perfectly fine option. The Edge is a DLC dagger that grants a huge plus 5 damage, plus 3% crit chance, plus 4 attack, and 2 rune slots. This is my personal favorite dagger because of its super high base damage being on par with the damage of a strong longsword, while also having the higher armor penetration and faster attack speed of a dagger. I always use this dagger on my main scrapper, whether they are a dual-wielding warrior or rogue. The Rose's Thorn grants plus 2 dexterity, plus 1 combat health regen, plus 3 damage, plus 5% melee crit chance, plus 30% crit or backstab damage, and 3 rune slots. It's the best dagger in the game, at least on paper, but it's also hugely expensive as you can buy it from Garen in Orzammar for just over 148 gold. I'd particularly recommend this one if you want to use the Tainted Blade, since it also gives you a bit of health regen to stave off the health drain. And I'd use this in combination with a second dagger instead of a larger weapon to make the most of it. Thorn of the Dead Gods, the tier 6 version, is a nice dagger with plus 3 damage, plus 3 armor penetration, and 2 rune slots. It's not amazing, but it's pretty good, and you can obtain it for free as part of the Drifter's Cache side quest in the Deep Roads. Early in the game, you can pick up a tier 2 version of Thorn of the Dead Gods from Barlin in the Lothering Tavern, which has a little damage and armor penetration too. You can also loot Beastman's Dagger in the Circle Tower for plus 10% crit or backstab damage, and 2 rune slots. You can find Crow Daggers in a lot of places and even buy one from Caesar in Denerim or Alamar in Dusttown. Crow Daggers can be of any tier between 1 and 7, so the amount of rune slots depends on the weapon's tier, but it will always give you plus 15% crit or backstab damage. And Olaf's Prized Cheese Knife is alright too. It grants plus 1 armor penetration and has 2 rune slots, and you can loot it from the Locked Chest and Honleith as part of the Stone Prisoner DLC. Early, I'd recommend picking up some of these early daggers and then equipping the Edge as soon as you have the dexterity required for it. After that, you can work your way up to some of the more difficult to acquire daggers I mentioned. If you want to pair a dagger with a larger weapon, particularly if you're doing a strength-dex hybrid build, then the best large weapons are longswords, followed by a few war axes. Asturian's Might is a longsword that grants plus 2 damage, plus 1 armor penetration. It weakens nearby darkspawn and has 1 to 2 rune slots depending on when you loot it as part of its side quest in the DLC area Soldier's Keep. The weakens darkspawn property doesn't work in the vanilla game, but Dane's Fixes properly implements it, so it makes this longsword a lot better. I like this sword because it's a grey Warden blade specifically, but also because of its damage and armor penetration bonuses working well for a rogue. Duncan's Sword is a longsword that grants plus 3 willpower, plus 3 cunning, plus 2 combat stamina regen, plus 4 damage versus darkspawn, and has 2 to 3 rune slots depending on when it's looted as part of the Return to Ostagar DLC. This sword is absolutely meant far more for a rogue than a warrior due to that cunning bonus, though I will say it's not amazing by any means. The damage versus darkspawn is really good if you're fighting in areas full of darkspawn like the Deep Roads or the Battle of Denerim, but I'd probably use another sword in areas that don't have darkspawn. Starfang, the longsword version of it, grants plus 3 dexterity, plus 3 damage, plus 2.5 armor penetration, and 3 rune slots. You can craft it at Soldier's Peak from the Meteor Metal Ore, and because of its stats, it's a really good longsword for a strength-dex hybrid rogue or a warrior, so it's a great choice to craft it in any case. In terms of war axes, they can be pretty good for strength-dex hybrid scrappers. AODH, or A as I've heard it said in pronunciation guides, is an interesting axe. It grants plus 3% melee crit chance, plus 20% fire resistance, minus 5% cold resistance, plus 1 fire damage, and 2 rune slots. The interesting thing about this axe is that fire damage, because that bonus applies to any instance of fire damage you do with an attack. So if you have the Flaming Weapon spell active in the party, this fire damage will get added to the separate fire damage done from that spell. If you have 2 fire runes in the axe, you'll also get 2 separate instances of fire damage, 1 for each rune, and that plus 1 damage will be added to both. It may not seem like a big deal, but especially if you take this axe in areas with enemies weak to fire, such as Darkspawn or Undead, and have flaming weapons and fire runes, it's surprisingly powerful. Plus, it has an interesting codex entry with a story of how the axe came to be. You can obtain this axe by looting Kristoff during a map encounter in Denerim as part of the Pearls Before Swine side quest. Similar to AODH are 2 war axes with damage versus darkspawn bonuses. Axe of the Grey grants plus 3% melee crit chance, plus 2 armor penetration, plus 6 damage versus Darkspawn, and has 2 rune slots. You can obtain it in the Grey Warden Vault during the Landsmeet portion of the main quest. Speak to Warden after you save him from the Arl's estate, and he'll tell you the location of the vault in Denrim. Bloodline grants plus 3 dexterity, plus 10% spirit resistance, plus 1 armor penetration, plus 4 damage versus Darkspawn, and has 2 to 3 rune slots depending on your level when you obtain it. You can loot it from the Corrupted Spider Queen and Ortan Taig in the Deep Roads as part of the Dwarven main quest. With these two axes, you can do a similar thing of damage bonus stacking as with AODH, but this time for damage versus Darkspawn bonuses. You can use Silverite runes in these weapons, and the instances of extra damage versus Darkspawn you do will have the plus 6 or plus 4 added, respectively. If you're playing as a Strength Dex hybrid rogue, I'd even go as far as to say that if you unlock the Dual Weapon Mastery passive, you could even equip both of these axes during the Battle of Denerim and fill them with the most powerful Silverite runes you can find for huge extra damage versus Darkspawn. A more basic but good war axe for a rogue is the Biteback Axe, which is actually a rogue-restricted weapon that doesn't have any strength requirements, so you could even use it on a regular rogue if you wanted to, though I'd still say a dagger is better. It grants plus 1.5 armor penetration, plus 15% crit or backstab damage, and has 2 rune slots. You can loot it from How during the Landsmeet quest Rescue the Queen. It's good, but doesn't have the same damage potential as the other axes. Finally, the Veshial is generally speaking the best war axe since it's tier 7 and has good bonuses. Plus 2 strength, plus 5% melee crit chance, plus 1 combat stamina regen, plus 10% crit or backstab damage, plus 2 nature damage, and of course 3 rune slots. The nature damage, unfortunately, isn't very good, since many enemies are resistant or even straight up immune to nature damage. However, the other stats are quite good, so it's always a pretty good option for a melee scrapper who has a decent strength score, at least 31. It is very expensive though. You can buy it from Bodan in the party camp for a bit over 131 gold. Most of the time, unless I particularly want to use axes on my characters, I don't bother buying the Veshial since I just think it's too expensive. There are so many good longswords and axes you can get for free, so unless you really like this one, you don't need to spend that much gold on it. Finally, for weapon runes, the most important thing I recommend is to put 1 strong paralyze rune in each of your weapons so that you have a chance to paralyze enemies with each attack. Once you have coup de grace, you'll be able to backstab enemies even from the front if they're paralyzed, but the paralyzation effect is generally useful since it will stop enemies from moving and attacking. The best damaging runes to use alongside the paralyzed ones are fire runes. Fire damage is super effective against Darkspawn and Undead who are weak to fire, but also generally against a lot of other enemies that don't have fire resistances. You can also use specialized runes that deal extra damage to Darkspawn, Silverite runes, or extra damage to Undead, Cold Iron runes. Silverite runes would be great to use when you go into the Deep Roads or during the final battle, since there will be hordes of Darkspawn to fight there. Cold Iron runes are useful in Redcliffe and some smaller parts of areas like bits of the Brisilian Forest and Brisilian Ruins. Though since you'll also be fighting werewolves and other creatures in the Brisilian Forest and Ruins, I'd much rather recommend going with Fire and Lightning runes. If you're going to fight in an area that doesn't really have Darkspawn or Undead, or has very few of them, and instead has enemies like demons or dragons, then don't use Fire, Silverite, or Cold Iron. Instead, go with Lightning runes since very few enemies are resistant to electricity damage. I'd recommend this for the Urn of Sacred Ashes and Broken Circle quests. Otherwise, only use Lightning runes to fill up empty spaces if you don't have any Fire, Silverite, or Cold Iron runes left. With this, we reach the end of my comprehensive guide to the Rogue class in Dragon Age Origins. Due to the detailed manner of this video, it was an extremely long one, so if you've watched until the end, thank you. I really appreciate it. The Rogue is far more specialized at dealing damage than the other two classes, and because of this, it can feel powerful, yes, but also less interesting due to the lack of variety of builds. Mostly it just comes down to do damage in melee or do damage from a distance, with very few support or utility options. The best thing about rogues, in my opinion, is opening locks and disarming traps, especially if we're talking about companions. In the case of a rogue warden, I love playing as a scrapper since I can focus on controlling my warden and manually positioning them to backstab enemies. But when it comes to the rogue companions, I try to give them a simpler build so that I don't need to micromanage them. For Zevran, I'd use a basic dual-wielding coup de grace build with paralyze and damaging runes, and for Liliana, of course, the basic archer build with some support coming from her bard specialization. Still, I do feel that if you don't micromanage your rogues or else spend a long time to create very thorough tactics for them, they tend to feel a bit underwhelming compared to warriors and mages. Certainly, I think rogues are the least beginner-friendly class because of this. You'd think the mage would be not beginner-friendly because it has so many spells, but because of its huge variety of builds and relatively high power of most spells, pretty much any mage build is viable, so they're a lot easier to play for beginners than rogues. It is very satisfying to play as a rogue once you figure out how the game works though. So hopefully, with this in-depth guide to the rogue class in DAO, you can enjoy rogue gameplay more. In any case, if you're looking forward to more videos about Dragon Age and other games I like, do remember to subscribe, and leave a like and comment while you're at it too. They really help. This has been B Tier Mutineer. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you next time.